I keep a bottle of vodka in my freezer. It's been there since I got sober. It is in fact the last bottle I was working on before I stopped drinking. I like having it there, and in some ways it helps me to cope with temptation. If it ever gets bad enough that I consider drinking, I won't have to buy alcohol. If I ever get to the point of buying alcohol, once the purchase is made, my mind will try to treat the decision as already being out of my hands. But since I have the bottle at home, the decision of whether to drink or not is much more sharply delineated. At no point can I tell myself that even if I do buy a bottle now, I can always make up my mind later about actually drinking or not. It keeps me honest. It's also a crutch, and I'm aware of that. It lets me tell myself that I might drink again someday, if some great tragedy befalls me, the death of a loved one or the like. I'm concerned, uncertain, if my current attempt at sobriety would withstand heavy scrutiny, a real test. I lack faith in myself, but the bottle helps for now. I like contradictions. In my eyes, they are one of the greatest defining features of what it means to be human. And how you choose to resolve your own can prove who you want to be, who you really are. I want to be sober. I want to drink. I want the world to conform to my vision. I want my vision to conform to the world. I want to give up and live for the next dopamine hit. I want to create things that will leave a positive impact, and perhaps the most perplexing. I want to live. I cherish my body and I care for its needs. And yet there is something rooted deeply within me that craves annihilation, to cease existing, to cause irreversible damage to myself. It varies in its extremity, but its mere existence is paradoxical, counter to nature. I have always been a nervous person. As a child, I got into the habit of picking and chewing my nails until they bled. When my nails had been systematically gnawed down to nubs, I began to attack the cuticles and nail beds. I would use pencils to pry up bits of skin, tweezers to pull out the newly growing layers of keratin. I pulled off deep layers of skin that wrapped around my fingers, leaving them raw and red, making it hard to grasp anything. These wounds often became infected and very painful. I didn't enjoy the pain. It was an inconvenience, but that didn't stop me. It still hasn't either. Though I've managed to reduce it, I've never been able to stop. I also had a fear of falling asleep. I was obsessed with death at the time, the permanence and finality of it, and my mind was doing somersaults trying to imagine its own non-existence. I was afraid of dying in my sleep. For some reason, the idea of dying while unconscious was even more terrifying than seeing my death coming. Eventually, this fear passed, and by my early teenage years, it had been replaced by another. The fear of waking up, a fear of tomorrow, the future. I resented much of my life, and escaping into books or video games in the evening was often the only thing that brought me any amount of interest in life. The only problem was my alarm clock, dragging me back into a world that I hated. I would put off sleeping into the wee hours of the morning, which only served to make me more anxious about how terrible I would feel the next day. I started oversleeping, waking up to realize that I was late for school, and then escaping back into sleep. I believe that is where my own personal fixation with oblivion began. I just wanted it all to disappear, and sleeping was a way to achieve that. Fear of the future has been a permanent fixture of my life ever since. I look upon my scars with pride, no metaphor. By any real standards, I have no permanent crippling damage, but I enjoy the marks that life has left upon my body. Perhaps it's childish, but I see them as proof that I've lived, but I've tried to do things that were difficult, dangerous, and tried hard, pushed myself regardless or even in spite of minor cosmetic damage. My legs are mottled with small white scratches and pockmarks from forcing my way through brambles clad only in shorts as a child. There's an angry purple scar on my right shin, courtesy of the sharp end of a rusty wire I encountered diving in the river. Likewise, my eardrums have both been ruptured from holding a large rock and walking along the bottom of that river and the ensuing series of ear infections. My abdomen and thighs are covered in ripples of pale stretch marks, distorted waves from periods when I rapidly gained and lost weight. On my right thigh, I can still make out the runes I carved into my flesh as a woe-begotten teenager. I remember doing so with the sentiment that if I was cutting myself, I should at least make sure the scars weren't embarrassing. I love coming home from work, my arms and hands covered in small nicks, scrapes, and cuts. It makes me feel like I worked hard. I gave it my all. In a similar vein, when I was in the depths of my drinking, I took enjoyment in the thought of how much damage I had caused my body internally. Sometimes I would intentionally mix medications with alcohol to feel that I was advancing the death of my organs and the march of my demise. I would exercise to the point of muscle failure, and then keep pushing through to feel the damage I was causing my body. This was a passive, perversely enjoyable suicidality. I was egging myself on. I was only ever sober at work, but not really. With the amount I was drinking, I don't believe there was any point in the day when I could have been considered legally sober. Rather, I paused drinking while I was at work. And the combination of sleep deprivation and slow withdrawal, with unmeetable expectations and non-stop hard physical labor, was, on more than one occasion, enough for me to come to lying on the floor of a walk-in somewhere with a razor blade pressed to my throat. I understood the steps I had taken to get there, but it was almost as if I were watching the events unfold rather than experiencing them myself. The need for annihilation in me seems to stem from a deep-seated self-hatred and dissatisfaction with life. These feelings reinforce one another, but I think they have the same cause: caring too much. I am easily moved by my emotions. Maybe this is a product of my childhood, but it could also just be the way I am. Regardless, being pulled in so many different directions at once makes me lose sight of the world in front of me. My mind can fixate on any thought and decide why that thought means my ruin. Like 1,000 monkeys hammering away at typewriters, my mind, given enough time, will eventually generate a reasonably convincing case for its own obliteration. At a certain point, any living body in motion will tire to the point of exhaustion. But my mind doesn't know how to stop and rest without the assistance of altered states, or by permanently ceasing operations altogether. My love for alcohol is really only a love for its ability to bring me this annihilation, while still leaving me in something resembling a conscious state. But having access to some kind of relief, like a piece of flotsam in the ocean, I desperately cling to it and only sink myself further in the process. Knowing this, I can choose to either be drunk all the time or never allow myself access to it. But where does that leave me in terms of relief, resting my mind? I found that actively engaging in things that make me afraid helps some. Things like driving fast, climbing cliff walls, generally putting my body in physical danger by choice. I don't know if it's necessarily the adrenaline that helps, or simply the knowledge that the task demands my complete focus to keep me alive. Another thing that helps is trying to enjoy the struggle. I've always enjoyed exercise, but I've typically been more motivated by activities with a means to an end, sports or work. Lately, I've been going for more hikes on my days off, and if I feel really stressed out when I get home from work, I might go for a run. A lot of the time I don't want to exercise, but I know that it will make me feel better, so I do it as a gift to myself. It's not as effective as alcohol for numbing my mind, but once I hit the point in a run or a steep hike when my legs don't want to move anymore, and my lungs can't manage my breathing without supervision, it takes all of my focus just to keep my body moving. Sleep is probably the most important tool for disengaging from consciousness, and it's also the most difficult. I have never stopped fearing the future, and my sleep hygiene isn't great. If I ever let my body dictate how long I sleep, it will consistently go for upward of 16 hours. And there have been periods of my life where that was exactly what I did on a regular basis. The oft-stated sentiment that one doesn't want to die but simply to sleep forever rings a little too true sometimes. Once I get to sleep, the only thing that can get me out of bed is an obligation to another person. I've arranged my life so that I always have someone depending on me to get up at 5 a.m., 7 days a week. This is the only way for me to get things done on my days off, and it's good for my overall well-being. But when it comes to getting rest, efficacy, and ceasing mental function, sleep comes third perhaps only to alcohol and death. And my similar lack of self-control in the area makes it hard for me to look to sleep as something I should engage with more. I'm always tired, but no amount of sleep will fix that problem. Getting less than enough will certainly worsen it, but real energy and mental focus comes from shocking my body and mind, with exercise, with work, by getting out in nature and moving, by my proximity to death and oblivion, truly knowing, feeling that I am alive. Nothing I've said so far is particularly profound or unique. This is all the textbook advice that has been given to me for years, from family, therapists, social media, and the like. But I never acted on it consistently, and there's a reason for that. The mental shift has to take place before the physical changes can begin. They reinforce one another, but I started microscopically small. The only expectation I enforce with myself is that I spend half an hour doing something worthwhile every day, as soon as I'm free from any other obligations. Don't wait. It doesn't matter if you're tired, if you're a nervous wreck. The person who just wants to sit on the couch for the rest of the day isn't who you really are. It's fear that is in control, the fear of expending energy on difficult things. It doesn't want you to recover, to enjoy life, or to take control. Recovery, finding your real identity, starts when you stop running from your pain and start running toward it. Become the hunter. Become the hawk. Only in silence the word. Only in dark the light. Only in dying life, bright the hawk's flight on the empty sky.